Okay, so let's call this part 2 since my camera went down. But do you mind if I ask you a question? We also went offline, and I want to get back to that as well. When you say redlining, because I don't think everyone really understands that, what is redlining, and how has it been a barrier for the marginalized?
Yeah, so I hope I'm getting this completely accurate, so feel free to Google it too. But so redlining is this historical practice of planners, of neighborhood developers, I believe mostly private developers, but I think partially also government planners, literally drew red lines on the map. And those were kind of the barriers that they set up geographically between specifically white and black, but just a racially comprised barrier. This looked, it was really clear in the suburbs, and basically HOAs had this agreement of if you're a person of color you can't live here. I mean, it was literally written in the bylaws of many neighborhood organizations, and so it was exclusion purely based on race, and then that coupled with banks being unwilling to give loans to people of color to buy a home for the first time. Even racism in the GI Bill of who can actually access that, it was all of that kind of combined to exclude people from opportunities to buy their first home. And so when homes were being mass produced and they became accessible to the public, this single family dwelling unit became the new American dream, the thing that people could actually accomplish realistically through receiving loans from the government. These were all new ideas in the 50s, and then of course highway development and expansion brought people who could afford and were allowed to afford because of what they looked like out to the suburbs. That's where a lot of our, especially urban, the inequality starts to begin there, and accessibility to services and wealth building and all of those things that come out of being not able to access housing.
How do you think that has affected school districts? And do you want to, if you don't mind, if we could get back to our conversation around gentrification as well. But yeah, just first addressing how does that affect education within both communities?
So when I also was first learning about how schools are funded and just kind of learning about how cities are formed, not only the built environment, but where does the money come from? How are things funded? And knowing how our public schools are funded by the district property taxes, I was blown away. I'm like, are you kidding me? I think seeing housing in that bigger picture of how it really affects everything, that became kind of my bottom line of, in addition to being a basic need of food, water, a safe place to live, it's also the base for accessing quality education. I'm it just became so clear to me how pouring my energy into housing would have a bigger impact on families in so many different ways. And so education is directly affected, especially public education. And then of course geography, so where you live, lack of transportation, lack of quality public transportation that picks you up on time and it's affordable and you know that you can rely on it. All of that impacts where your kids are going to school. So yeah, I would say it's directly correlated.
Awesome. For sure. We had an interesting conversation that I was like, wait till you about gentrification, because I think just your statement right off about gentrification I hadn't heard before, especially by someone who is progressive. So can you share with me your perspective on gentrification?
Sure. This is something that I started thinking about, especially my last year of college and then my first year out of college, and so I haven't necessarily run it by experts, and so I would love to, it could be things that I'm missing, so that's my disclaimer. Because it's a very controversial topic, and that is of gentrification. It's a hot button issue. It is something that I think a lot of people are misunderstanding because they're associating it with the image of gentrification and who is behind it right now. So gentrification in its pure state, not tied into a class or a race of people, is neighborhood improvement. So the steps that are taken to increase property taxes or to increase property value. For example, there's an empty lot, transforming that into a community garden. These are things that we see people doing that are often outsiders to the community, that drive up the property value for the people living there, who are often renters who can't afford to stay there. Even homeowners, their property taxes are driven up because of these things that have happened too quickly in the name of improvement that aren't done carefully. And so gentrification in its pure state is a beautiful thing. I think every neighborhood needs to experience gentrification, but it needs to be locally driven and carefully thought out. What people mistake the term gentrification for is the displacement that is the after effect. So while the act of gentrifying causes property values to go up, those are actually good things. And then the negative, extreme negative, is the displacement that follows, and follows very quickly. And I think, so now that's been racialized too. So gentrification is happening by white folks, and then people of color in the neighborhood are affected directly and most drastically, especially because they're often renters for those things about the redlining, inability to